Hi there. If you think life in the Wild West was all about adventure, cowboys, endless sunsets, and the romance of pioneers, you are deeply mistaken. Everything you saw in movies and read in books is a lie, sugar-coated for naive dreamers. In reality, a farmer on the western frontier of the United States lived in constant struggle with dirt, cold, hunger, and his own exhaustion. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is there. I am really curious to see who has joined us. Now, settle in and get ready. We are starting. You open your eyes at dawn, not because you feel rested or because you have mastered the noble art of rising with the sun, but because the cold has seeped through your thin, scratchy blanket and the persistent shrieking of the rooster, which you have fantasized about strangling at least once per week, drills into your skull. The rooster announces the beginning of another day, although, if you are honest, day and night have long ago blurred into a single continuous cycle of filth, fatigue, and vague discomfort. The bed you sleep on is a pile of old straw, no longer golden, but the ashen gray of decay. Once, someone, perhaps even you, if you care to remember, fluffed the straw and aired it out. That time has passed. Now you merely rearrange it each night, carefully avoiding the sharpest stalks and ignore the occasional scurrying of mice beneath your pillow. The scent of damp hay, mingled with a hint of mildew and something unmistakably rodent, clings to your clothes and hair. You swing your legs out of bed, and the soles of your feet meet the hard-packed earth floor. Not wooden planks, not even flagstones, just dirt. Dust has a way of collecting in the air, swirling every time someone passes, and settling in your nose and throat. In the winter, the dirt turns to mud, sucking at your boots, freezing solid at night. In the summer, it becomes a choking powder. There is never a season when it is clean. Your house is small, barely larger than the barn, its walls cobbled together from rough-hewn boards scavenged from whatever timber you could find. There are cracks wide enough to see daylight, and sometimes you wake up to the gentle caress of a draft, carrying with it the perfume of manure. You stand, stretching your back, already sore from a lifetime of too much work and too little rest. If you were hoping to begin the day quietly, your livestock have other plans. The rooster's racket is only the opening note. The cows bellow, their voices echoing across the frozen yard, demanding to be milked and fed. If you are slow, they grow impatient, rattling the fence or wandering off if you have failed to patch last night's latest gap. If the chickens are not pecking at your bare feet, the dog is barking at something invisible, and somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's donkey brays, as if to remind you that misery is communal here. You shuffle across the floor, feeling for the worn places where the ground is almost level, and pull on yesterday's clothes. Washing them is a luxury reserved for moments when the river is not frozen and your arms are not too tired to scrub. The shirt sticks to your skin, stiff with old sweat and the faint tang of barnyard air. Your boots, cracked and battered, go on next. The left one leaks, And you know this because you stepped in a puddle yesterday and spent the rest of the day cursing quietly every time icy water squished between your toes. There is no glass in your window, just a piece of greased paper stretched thin and patched in places with rags. Light filters through, painting the inside of your cabin with a pale, sickly glow. There are no curtains, just an old burlap sack nailed up for privacy, though nobody ever comes close enough to care. You grab your hat, a battered thing, more holes than fabric, but still better than nothing, and step outside into the morning. The cold bites at your cheeks, even in summer, and the ground crunches under your boots. You are careful not to trip over the axe, which you left in the yard last night after splitting a few logs, or the broken bucket you keep meaning to fix but never do. There is mud everywhere, or dust, depending on the season. The air carries the heavy scent of manure, wood smoke, and something faintly metallic from the old plow rusting in the field. The chickens scatter as you approach, clucking indignantly, their feet kicking up little clouds of dust. One of them, your least favorite, tries to peck at your hand. You kick at it, half heartedly, but miss. It is only the beginning of the day, and already you are losing small battles. You glance at the sky, a washed out blue streaked with thin clouds. No one cares what the weather will be, because you will be outside working in it, whatever it does. Rain means mud. Sun means dust. Snow means misery. None of it makes a difference. In the distance, you hear the steady, dull rhythm of your neighbor's hammer. Someone somewhere is fixing a fence, or more likely, losing that particular struggle as well. You consider calling out, but you know it will just be a grunt and a nod in reply. Out here, words are wasted on things that cannot be fixed. Your back aches, your head throbs, and your hands are already stained with dirt before you have even started the real work. This is how every morning begins, in the dirt, with the promise of another day almost exactly like the last. You tell yourself, one more day. Then you take your first step toward the barn, and the world grinds forward, relentless and gray. You think about water every day. You do not think about it because it is refreshing or because you are particularly fond of drinking, but because it is the very thing that will determine whether you live or die, whether you get through the week with a headache or with something worse. Water is everywhere and nowhere. It falls from the sky in torrents when you least need it and disappears completely when your throat is so dry it feels like the inside of an old boot left in the sun. Your water comes from a well you or someone before you dug by hand. The work was long, backbreaking, and, if you are honest, a little bit pointless, because the water you reached is only a shade less muddy than the dirt around it. You tell yourself it is better than nothing, but every morning, when you pull up that creaky bucket, you pray that today will not be the day you find something floating in it, something dead, something alive, or, as happened once, something you cannot even recognize. You stagger out to the well, the cold air nipping at your neck. The well sits a little too far from the house, but it had to be dug where the ground would not collapse. You still remember the stories of a neighbor's well caving in and swallowing a goat, and nearly the neighbor himself. That is the sort of excitement that passes for news out here. The rope, frayed and stiff, bites into your palms as you lower the bucket. Your mind wanders while you listen to the hollow slap of water against wood far below. Sometimes you imagine that, with every pull, you are hauling up all the memories of the people who lived here before you, their failures, their tired dreams, the taste of dust on their tongues. Finally, you feel the weight change. You heave the bucket upward, hand over hand, breath fogging in the chill. When you set the bucket down, the water inside is the color of weak tea. A faint film floats on top, oily, iridescent, beautiful in the way that a wound can be beautiful. You stare into it for a moment, wondering what invisible things swim beneath the surface. Parasites, bacteria, the ghosts of last year's summer fever. You tell yourself that you have drunk worse. You probably have. Sometimes, if the rains are kind, the water will be clear for a week or two. You might even imagine it tastes sweet. More often, it is tinged with the sharp tang of iron, the metallic flavor lingering in your mouth all day. There was once a rumor, spread by a passing tinker, that iron was good for the blood. You hope that is true, though the man who shared this wisdom had teeth the color of old coins and a cough that echoed in your bones. You fill a jug for the house. The jug is heavy, and your arms ache, but you would rather carry it now than have to return later. Every trip to the well is a risk. The rope might snap, the sides might crumble, or a snake might be coiled beneath the lip, waiting to surprise you with a little morning terror. You think about these things to distract yourself from the endlessness of the task. You are always fetching water. You are always thirsty. Inside the house, you pour a little of the water into a pot for breakfast. The bottom of the jug is thick with silt, but you have learned to pour slowly, to leave the worst of it behind. Your mother taught you that, or maybe you taught yourself. It hardly matters. Out here, good habits are as important as good luck. The pot bubbles on the stove, and a thin, yellow scum rises to the surface. You skim it off with a spoon, tossing it into the ashes. If you are lucky, today there are no frogs, no drowned beetles, no strange, slimy things. But there have been days when you have pulled up more than water. You remember one winter morning, drawing up a half-frozen rat, its tail stiff and white, its eyes wide with the same surprise you felt. You threw it as far as you could, then tried not to think about it while you boiled the water for tea. You have heard stories of places where water runs clean and fast, where you can dip your hands into a stream and drink without fear. You know these are fairy tales. Out here, water is always suspect, always a little dangerous. Some of your neighbors tried digging deeper wells, but they found only rocks, or worse, pockets of foul gas that made them dizzy and sick. Others have tried catching rainwater, setting out barrels beneath the eaves, but the rain is capricious. When it comes in sheets, flooding the yard, washing away the soil, leaving behind puddles thick with mud and the footprints of every passing animal. You make do with what you have. You boil the water as long as you can spare the wood. Some days you skip the fire and drink it cold, hoping that your stomach is tougher than whatever swims in the depths. If you fall ill, you will treat it with whatever bitter roots you can find, or you will simply wait it out, lying in your straw bed, sweating and shivering, staring at the ceiling until you feel strong enough to stumble outside again. Water is precious, but never pleasant. You give it to your animals first, because sick cows mean no milk, and sick chickens mean no eggs. You haul twice as many buckets for them, filling old troughs and battered pans, watching as they lap up the same muddy draft that you must drink. Sometimes you envy the way they seem not to care, but then you remember that animals die just as easily as people. You have buried enough of both to know. You think of the old settlers saying, water is life, but out here, it is just another burden, just another reason to be afraid. Every sip is a gamble. Every bucket is a reminder that even if you survive today, tomorrow's water will still taste of earth and old secrets. You would like to imagine that breakfast is the best part of the day, a warm, inviting meal to fill your belly and prepare you for the relentless grind ahead. You have read about such breakfasts in cheap newspapers passed from hand to hand, stories of bacon crisping in the pan, piles of eggs, cakes, and hot coffee. You have not tasted coffee in months, nor bacon in even longer. Your breakfast is something else entirely. Your morning begins with the same ritual as every other. You stand by the crooked table in the only room your house can boast, staring at the battered pot simmering over a meager fire. The fire is stingy, barely enough to heat the water you so grudgingly hauled from the well. The wood you cut yesterday was damp, hissing and spitting as it burns. A thin smoke fills the house, stinging your eyes and settling into your clothes. You wave it away, though you know the scent will follow you all day. The food is as uninspiring as the surroundings. This morning, like most mornings, you make porridge from a handful of oats scraped from the bottom of a sack. There is always less than you remember. Oats are not plentiful here, nor cheap, but they fill the stomach better than nothing. You pour the oats into the boiling water, watching as the mixture thickens and forms gray, lumpy islands. The smell is not unpleasant, but neither is it inviting. It is simply food. Sometimes, when the cows have not gone dry or succumbed to some new ailment, you have a bit of milk to stir in. You pour it carefully, watching for clumps. The milk is rarely sweet, sometimes sour, and always a little gritty from flecks of straw and dirt. Still, it is precious. If the cow is ill, the porridge is thinner, and your hunger grows sharper. Eggs are a luxury, a rare gift from chickens, who seem to take delight in hiding their treasures. The hens wander where they please, laying eggs in haystacks, under boards, sometimes even in the neighbor's yard. You have spent hours searching, crawling on your knees in the dust and dung, cursing under your breath. When you find a clutch, it is a triumph, though sometimes the eggs are cracked, or worse, already half formed into the promise of a new chick. On these mornings, you toss the spoiled ones into the yard for the dog or the crows, and try not to think about what you are missing. Bread is even rarer. The last loaf you baked was a month ago, and it was little more than a hard puck of flour and water, blackened on the outside and raw in the middle. You gnawed at it for days, determined not to waste a crumb. Now you do without. There is always hope for the next harvest, but hope does not fill the belly. Once, in the early days, you had a bit of salted pork hanging in the shed, a treat reserved for holidays or unexpected guests. Now the shed stands empty, the hooks rusted and lonely. You sometimes dream of meat, of its richness and fat, but most nights you wake up before you can taste it. So you eat your porridge in silence, standing by the window, looking out at the gray morning. The wind rattles the boards. A chicken pecks at the dirt just beyond the door. You chew each mouthful slowly, grinding the oats against your teeth, feeling them stick to your tongue. There is no sugar, no honey, nothing to cut the blandness. Your teeth ache with each bite, the result of too many winters and not enough real food. Sometimes you think about those who eat better, the merchant in town, the preacher, even the blacksmith, people with money, or luck, or both. You remind yourself that envy is pointless. Here, on this patch of stubborn ground, you are all equals before the same meager breakfast. You share what little you have. If there are children in the house, they eat first. Their faces are thin, but their eyes still hold some spark of expectation. You dole out portions, careful to leave enough for everyone. If you have a wife, she eats last, scraping the pot for what remains. You pretend not to notice her hunger, and she pretends not to notice yours. This is the silent bargain of survival. Some mornings, there are visitors, neighbors in need, or strangers passing through. Hospitality is a duty, though it is more about sharing misfortune than comfort. You pour a little extra water into the pot, thinning the porridge until it is almost a soup. Nobody complains because everyone understands. On rare days, breakfast is interrupted by the sound of an animal in distress, a cow caught in a fence, a chicken dragged off by a fox, a horse limping into the yard. You drop your spoon and run outside, cursing your luck, your life, and whatever gods may be listening. You solve the crisis as best you can, then return to cold porridge and colder thoughts. As you finish your meal, you scrape the pot clean with your finger, licking up the last taste. Hunger sits with you at the table, familiar as any family member. You know it will stay by your side all day, whispering in your ear, reminding you of everything you do not have. Breakfast does not make you strong. It does not prepare you for the day ahead. It is simply a pause, a brief moment when you pretend you are not already exhausted. You wash your bowl in the same bucket of muddy water, set it aside, and step outside once more into the pale, unforgiving morning. Here, breakfast is not a comfort. It is only a reminder there is never enough, and the day is just beginning. The moment breakfast, such as it is over. Your day truly begins, though begins is perhaps the wrong word, as it feels less like a start and more like the next breath in a suffocating, unbroken cycle. The field waits outside, vast in your memory, endless in your muscles, the dirt lying in sullen clumps beneath a sky that seems determined to flatten your hopes as much as the plow flattens the ground. You step out into a landscape already worn by your presence. The path to the field is a tangle of weeds and ruts, carved by your boots and the heavy wheels of your battered cart. The dew is still clinging to the grass, but you know it will not last. Soon enough, the sun will burn it off, and the ground will turn as hard as stone. The plow stands waiting, a crude thing of wood and rusted iron, lashed together more by faith and desperation than by any science of carpentry. Before you can begin, there is always a ritual of minor repairs. The harness on the plow is frayed, threatening to snap at any moment. You tie it together with a strip of old shirt, or perhaps a length of twine, saved from some forgotten package. There is always something to fix: a bolt loose, a blade bent, a shaft warped by last summer's heat. Your hands are already black with grease and earth before you have even turned the first furrow. If you are lucky, the horse is only tired and not outright lame. You lead her to the traces, murmuring encouragement. She is too old and too clever to believe. She rolls her eyes and stomps at the dust, but she stands still while you buckle the harness, her sides heaving with slow, patient breaths. You do not bother with dreams of a new horse, nor even a mule. You know what you have, and you make do, as you always do. The field itself is both promise and curse. In spring, it is a patchwork of mud and stones, the last snow melting into rivulets that carve tiny canyons through your best soil. You lift the plow and put your shoulder into the work, the blade fighting every inch, scraping over buried roots and half-rotted stumps. Some days you find more rocks than earth, and you haul them to the edges, building walls that do little to keep anything in or out, but mark the limits of your effort. Each row you cut is a minor victory, though it feels like defeat. The sun climbs higher, pressing its weight onto your back. The sweat stings your eyes, mingling with the dust that rises in choking clouds. You wipe your brow, leaving streaks of mud across your face. Your hands blister, then callous, then crack and bleed. Gloves, if you ever had them, are long since lost to the same rot that consumes your boots. In the summer, the field bakes under an unkind sun. The ground hardens, resisting your efforts. You hack at the soil, breaking it into reluctant clods, planting seeds with more hope than faith. The weeds seem to grow as you watch, bold and unashamed. You pull them by hand, knowing they will return, and curse them for every inch they steal from your crops. You plant what you can: corn, beans, potatoes, maybe a few scraggly rows of wheat, if you think the season will be long enough. Each seed is a gamble, a wager against weather, pests, and the thousand silent enemies that lurk beneath the soil. You have lost crops to frost in June, to hail in August, to locusts that arrived one year in a black cloud that turned day to night and stripped your field bare in less time than it takes to say your prayers. There are no guarantees, only effort and repetition. You do not plant with joy. You plant because there is no other way to live here. Each movement is automatic, learned through years of necessity. You stoop and bend, kneel and rise, your spine complaining with every motion. Sometimes you pause, stretching out muscles that will never be loose again, looking over the field as if you might spot some end to it all. There is none. Evenings do not bring relief. When the sun sets, you work by the last light, your shadow long and thin across the furrows. You listen to the silence, broken only by the call of a distant bird or the creak of your joints. The field is not quiet, not really. It hums with the hidden lives of insects, the rustle of unseen things in the grass, the slow decay of all things living and dead. Rain is a mixed blessing. Sometimes it comes as a gentle patter, sinking into the earth and making your work a little easier. More often, it arrives in a torrent, washing away seeds and hope alike, leaving behind a soup of mud that clings to your boots and refuses to let go. The mud cakes your hands, fills your pockets, ruins your tools. You curse the rain, but you curse the drought more. There is never a perfect day. Harvest is another kind of labor. When the crops are ready, if they are ready, you bend and cut, dig and gather, filling baskets and sacks that always seem too small. You watch for signs of rot, for the soft spots that mean your work has gone to waste. You store the harvest in bins and barrels, counting each ear of corn, each sack of potatoes, already planning how to make them last through the winter. There are days when it feels like you are making progress, when a field newly plowed or a basket newly filled brings a fleeting sense of accomplishment. But these moments are swallowed quickly by the knowledge that tomorrow will be the same. More rows to hoe, more weeds to pull, more back to break. You sometimes catch yourself thinking of a time when you did not know this life, when the field was only a distant patch of green, and you believed in the stories of easy riches and boundless opportunity. You no longer believe in those stories. The field has taught you better. Out here, nothing is easy, and nothing is ever truly finished. The work never ends. It stretches ahead of you, year after year, as wide and as merciless as the land itself. And so you work, because work is all there is. You push the plow, plant the seeds, fight the weeds, and pray, though you are not sure to whom anymore, that this year will be kinder, that the field will forgive you just once. You might have come out here thinking solitude would be a blessing. The advertisements and stories in faraway cities say that the West is a place where a person can be their own master, answerable to no one, king or queen of their own muddy domain. What they do not mention is that out here you are alone only when it is most inconvenient. For the rest of the time, your neighbors, if you are lucky, only a few miles distant, are as inescapable as the biting wind. The word neighbor sounds friendly. It brings to mind apple pies cooling on windowsills and warm invitations to dinner. Your neighbors, though, are just as poor and desperate as you are, and hospitality is measured in borrowed shovels and shared curses, not cakes or conversation. Their faces are lined with the same disappointment, their eyes hollowed by the same sleepless nights. You know them mostly by the shape of their hats and the gait of their walk, not by the details of their lives, because here no one has time or energy for real stories. You see your neighbors rarely, and when you do, it is never good news. Visits do not happen out of idle curiosity or affection. They happen because something is broken, burning, sick, or missing. Sometimes you see a figure approaching in the heat shimmer of the afternoon, limping down the path, hat in hand, expression already apologetic. You do not need to ask what they want. You know. Maybe they need to borrow your tools because theirs have finally snapped in half after years of repair and misuse. Maybe their horse has gone lame and they need to borrow yours, though you know full well your own animal can barely stand up straight by the end of the day. Maybe their roof is leaking, their cow is dying, their well has gone dry, or their child has disappeared into the thicket of sunflowers and tall grass that borders your properties. You are never happy to see them, but you never say no outright. It is a simple calculation, one you have performed so many times it no longer even feels like a choice. Today, you help them, and tomorrow, maybe, just maybe, when your fence collapses in the night or your barn catches fire, they will help you. Maybe. You do not like these odds, but they are all you have. Of course, sometimes their problems are yours, whether you want them or not. Disease does not stop at property lines. When your neighbor's pigs sicken and die, you know it is only a matter of time before the same fate comes for yours. When a pack of wolves finds their flock of sheep, you lie awake at night, rifle at hand, listening for the distant howl and wondering when they will come for you. Disaster here is communal, an ugly inheritance that everyone must share. When a fire breaks out, and fires happen often, because the wind is merciless and the buildings are little more than tinder, you drop everything and run, bucket in hand, without thinking. There is no fire brigade, no ringing bell, only the sight of thick smoke and the pounding of your heart. You throw water until your arms ache and your legs shake, and when it is over, you stand in the ashes, breathing in the ruin. Sometimes you save the barn, sometimes all you save is the memory of trying. There are meetings too, though meeting is a grand word for what usually amounts to a few tired men standing around, hats in hands, muttering plans. When the wild dogs grow bold, or the coyotes take too many chickens, you gather with your neighbors in the chill dawn, rifles slung over shoulders, eyes half closed from lack of sleep. There is no great speech, no inspiring call to arms. You trudge out together, united by necessity, hunting a danger you know will return next week. You do not talk much during these gatherings. Words are precious here, like everything else. You exchange nods, maybe a muttered greeting, and then focus on the work. Later, if you are lucky, someone produces a bottle of sour whiskey and you pass it around, each sip burning a brief warmth into the hollow of your chest. You almost feel human for a moment in the company of others who are just as tired just as beaten down. Sometimes, though, the problems your neighbors bring are less direct and more insidious. There are rumors, always rumors. Someone is said to be stealing chickens, or hoarding the best seed, or getting supplies from the town merchant on credit that everyone knows will never be repaid. There are arguments loud enough to carry over the fields, bitter enough to last for years. You try to stay out of it, but sooner or later you are drawn in, forced to take sides in feuds that have no beginning and no end. And then there is the silence, the long stretches when you see no one at all, when the only signs of your neighbor's existence are the distant curl of smoke from a chimney or the faint echo of a child's laughter blown across the barren fields. In those moments, you remember that out here, even enemies are a kind of company. When you do talk, it is always about practical matters: the weather, the state of the roads, the price of flour, if anyone has news from town, the list of who has died or who is dying. Rarely do you speak of hopes or dreams. Out here, such talk is seen as a kind of weakness, or worse, an invitation for fate to take notice and strike you down for your optimism. You help your neighbors, not because you want to, but because you must. They are your insurance policy, your emergency fund, your only safety net in a place that does not care whether you live or die. You share what you have, even if it is just misery, because you know that tomorrow it could just as easily be you walking up the path, hat in hand, desperate for a kindness you cannot afford to repay. And so, the cycle continues. Your problems are never truly your own. They echo across the hard packed earth, bouncing from farm to farm, carried by the wind and the weight of expectation. Out here, the West is wild, but never empty. It is full of the burdens you share, whether you want to or not. If you believed the stories told by those who had never spent a day west of the Mississippi, you might think that a farm full of animals means security, wealth, even a kind of gentle companionship. This is a fantasy, the kind of tale spun by merchants to sell almanacs and seed catalogs to city dwellers who dream of escape. Out here, livestock are not your pets, and they are certainly not your friends. They are your tormentors, your captors, your daily punishment, each with their own special way of making life harder than you thought possible. You have a few cows, a handful of chickens, maybe a couple of pigs if you are lucky, and one horse that is so old you sometimes catch her staring into the middle distance, as if dreaming of death or remembering better days. Each animal is both vital and dangerous. Vital because you need their milk, eggs, meat, and muscle, and dangerous because the loss of any one of them could be the difference between survival and ruin. You wake to their demands. The cows announce themselves at dawn, lowing at the fence, stamping in the mud, breathing great clouds of hot mist in the cold air. Their voices are deep and insistent, like a warning bell tolling at the start of every day. If you are late with their feed, they will try to break through the gate. If you are too quick, they will trample your boots looking for more. They chew with a kind of bored menace, as if they know how fragile your hold on order really is. You move through the morning chores with resignation. First, you haul buckets of water, muddy, heavy, always spilling, to the trough. A thirsty cow is a dangerous cow, quick to turn wild, quick to break bones. You have seen it happen, and you carry the memory and the ache of your shoulder that never quite healed right. Milking is an ordeal, never the gentle, picturesque moment described in storybooks. The cow shifts and kicks, her tail flicking filth into your face. Sometimes she stamps down hard, knocking over the pail, sending your morning's work splashing into the straw. You grit your teeth, press your forehead to her flank, and start over. The milk is warm, rich with the scent of animal and earth, and sometimes it is flecked with blood or pus, a sign that mastitis is setting in, and a sign that you are about to lose your main source of sustenance. The chickens are no better. They roam where they please, scratching up every bit of green, leaving behind little offerings on every step, every bench, every tool you forget to put away. They are loud, contrary, and despite what anyone tells you, stupid. Gathering eggs is a daily hunt, a crawl through the dust under porches and between boards, a careful negotiation with irate hens who peck and squawk and try to drive you off. When you finally find a nest, you might discover the eggs are already half spoiled or broken, or that a snake has beaten you to them. You keep a pig or two if you can afford it. Pigs are smart in a way that makes you uneasy. They watch you with shrewd little eyes, testing the fence every morning, rooting under boards and digging holes that seem to appear overnight. If a pig escapes, you can count on a day spent running, cursing, chasing it through the brambles, only to find it has doubled back to eat the kitchen scraps you foolishly left outside. In the end, you know that if you fall and cannot get up, the pigs will not wait for you to die before they help themselves. This is not a comforting thought, but it keeps you wary. Then there is the horse, your pride and your sorrow. She is the only thing standing between you and complete ruin, the only creature you trust with the plow or the cart. She is stubborn, as thin as a rake, her ribs showing through her coat. Her hooves split and crack. Her back is sore from years of pulling. You patch her up as best you can, old rags for bandages, a little linseed oil if you have any, a prayer to whatever spirit might be listening. You know that if she goes lame, you will be left dragging the plow yourself, and you try not to think about it too much. Illness is your constant companion. There are no veterinarians here, no medicine, but what you can concoct from bitter roots and old wives' tales. When one animal falls ill, the sickness spreads fast, invisible and merciless. You watch for signs. The cough that will not stop, the dullness in the eye, the strange swelling that foretells the end. You try everything: herbs, isolation, desperate measures learned from neighbors who are just as desperate as you. Sometimes it works, but more often it does not. You bury the dead yourself in shallow graves, hoping the wild dogs will not dig them up before the next rain. Loss is always waiting. Sometimes it is slow and drawn out, a wasting sickness, a lingering limp. Other times it is fast and brutal, a wolf in the night, a hawk in the afternoon, a storm that tears down the fence and scatters your stock to the winds. You patrol the property with a rusted rifle, the barrel pitted, the action sticky. It might fire, it might not. You keep it close anyway, a charm against the dark. Every animal has a price, a weight measured in calories and labor, in eggs and gallons of milk, in hope and heartbreak. When the merchant comes to town, you calculate endlessly. Can you afford to sell one? Can you afford not to? You remember the taste of fresh meat, but you also remember the emptiness that follows, the knowledge that you have traded tomorrow's security for today's hunger. And yet, you keep them alive. You patch up their wounds, fix the fence, hunt down the runaways, treat the sick, and bury the dead. You know each by sight, by sound, by smell. You name them, even though you tell yourself not to. When one dies, you feel it, a small, sharp pain, quickly buried under the avalanche of chores and worry. Livestock are a curse, but they are also your future, such as it is. You resent them, you rely on them, you lose sleep over them. Out here, you do not own your animals. They own you. You are their servant, their jailer, their undertaker. And every day, as you shovel muck and chase chickens and pray over sick cows, you wonder, briefly, bitterly, if somewhere on some other farm there is a person who loves this life. If there is, you have never met them. You hear city folk talk about weather like it is a background detail, something to complain about while sitting on a front porch or waiting for a streetcar. Out here, weather is not idle talk. It is not a passing annoyance. It is a daily enemy, one with 1,000 faces and no conscience. You wake up thinking about the weather. You go to sleep thinking about it. And during every waking minute, it sits on your shoulders, heavier than any sack of grain you have ever hauled. The weather on the frontier has one guiding principle: whatever you need, you will not get it. Pray for rain, and you will get sun, so much sun that your lips crack and your skin peels, so much sun that your fields shrivel to dust. Plead for a clear sky, and black clouds will roll in from nowhere, dropping hail the size of walnuts onto your ripening wheat, beating down what little hope you dared nurture. The land is greedy, and the sky is cruel. You check the sky out of habit, eyes narrowed against the glare. You have learned to read clouds, to judge the wind, to interpret the way your animals stand in the yard, sometimes more reliable than any almanac, which always seems to be wrong by exactly as much as you trusted it. Some mornings, there is a stillness, a heavy silence that tells you something is coming. Other days, you watch the horizon, a thin white line where the air shimmers with heat, and you know the crops will need watering, though your well is already running low. The rain comes when you do not want it. It comes sideways, driven by winds that strip the paint from your house, rip shingles off your roof, and flatten everything in its path. You try to catch some of it in barrels, but the gutters clog with leaves, and the water tastes like rot. When the rain stops, you wade through mud that clings to your boots and pulls them off your feet. You remember the times you lost a boot to the mud and spent the rest of the day hopping, swearing, a one legged spectacle for the chickens. Drought is a different kind of misery, and it is always lurking just behind the next sunrise. The ground bakes and splits, the crops wilt and go brittle. Dust rises in every gust of wind, sneaking through cracks in the walls, settling on every surface inside and out. The air tastes like grit. You drink your water slow, measuring every mouthful, because you know the well may run dry at any moment. When the wind howls across the fields, it takes the topsoil with it, and you watch your future disappearing on the breeze. Sometimes the weather decides to be dramatic. You have seen thunderstorms that seem to split the sky in two, the lightning so bright it burns after images into your eyes, the thunder shaking the ground beneath your feet. Once, a twister touched down a mile away and spun up a cloud of dust, fence posts, and, if the stories are to be believed, an entire flock of chickens from the Olson place. You spent the next week pulling bits of straw out of your hair and hoping the next one would miss you. The cold is its own brand of torture. Fall lasts about as long as a sneeze, and then the wind shifts and the frost comes. At first, you fight it with extra blankets and fires that burn all night. Soon enough, the fuel runs low and the cold creeps in, numbing your fingers, turning your breath to steam. You trudge out to the barn in the dark, hoping your animals have not frozen. Sometimes they have. Sometimes you spend an hour hacking at a water trough with an axe, trying to break through the inch-thick ice before your cow gives up and lies down for good. You try to prepare. You save seeds, stack firewood, mend the roof, and fill every crack in the walls with whatever rags and straw you can find. Still, the weather finds you. The wind gets in, rattling the boards, moaning in the eaves, making the house shudder. You wonder if it is only the wind, or if the land itself is laughing at you. You would laugh too if you had the energy. Sometimes you think you can outsmart it. You plant early, and a late frost kills your shoots. You plant late, and the heat comes early. You water the fields, and it rains for a week. You build a windbreak, and the wind shifts direction. You try not to take it personally, but after a while, it feels like the weather knows you by name. When you meet your neighbors, those weary, beaten people who live just far enough away that you cannot borrow salt, but close enough that you can see smoke from their chimneys, you talk about the weather. There is nothing else to talk about. Who has lost a field, whose roof blew off, who found their cow dead in the creek after a sudden thaw. The stories all blur together, one long litany of disaster and disappointment. There is no fairness in the weather and no pattern, despite what the old timers say. It does what it wants, and you are left to clean up the mess. You curse it, plead with it, ignore it, and sometimes you just stand in the yard and let it do what it will, because resistance is as pointless as praying for gold to rain from the sky. The land here is not tamed, and neither is the sky. You are only passing through, a temporary annoyance to the elements. When a rare, gentle day comes, one of those days when the sun is warm, the air still, and the fields seem to glow with possibility. You wait for the catch, the next blow, the next betrayal. You are rarely disappointed. If anyone asks what it is like living out here, you tell them the truth. You spend every day fighting the weather and every day losing, but you fight anyway, because that is all you can do. You think of your house as a fortress, not because it offers safety, but because you have to. It is the one thin, battered line between you and everything outside that would rather see you gone. People who have never lived on the frontier imagine a house as a place of warmth and comfort, something solid, a haven from the world. You know better. You know that out here, the house is just another test, a question of how many winters, winds, and disasters it can endure before it collapses, and whether you will still be inside when it happens. From the outside, your home looks like it was built by someone running out of time and hope. The boards are a mismatched patchwork, scavenged from anywhere you could get your hands on wood. The remains of an abandoned barn, trees felled by lightning, the splintered wreckage from a wagon lost to the river last spring. Nails are scarce, so you use whatever works: old horseshoe fragments, twisted wire, wooden pegs, and sometimes just luck. The roof sags under the weight of too many seasons. In the summer, it lets in shafts of blinding sunlight, illuminating the dust motes that drift endlessly in the stale air. In the winter, it lets in the cold, snow, and sometimes the wind itself, which slips through every crack and howls along the rafters as if searching for you. You have patched the holes so many times that the roof is now a mosaic of tin, shingles, bark, and rags. There are buckets in every corner, waiting to catch the drips whenever the rain comes, but somehow the water always finds a new place to fall. Inside, the house is smaller than you remember, no matter how many times you measure. The single room does everything. It is a kitchen, a bedroom, a sick room, a storeroom, and when needed, a stable for whatever animal you are trying to keep alive through the latest disaster. The walls are thin, so thin that you can hear every word shouted outside, every footstep in the yard, every howl of the coyotes that circle in the darkness. At night, when the fire dies down, you can even hear the mice chewing through your last sack of flour behind the boards. There is no insulation except what you make yourself. You stuff the gaps between the boards with moss, mud, and the remains of last winter's clothing. Sometimes the wind still gets through, lifting the edges of blankets and making the candle flame dance. You pile everything you own against the walls to try and keep out the cold. Barrels, crates, sacks of grain if you are lucky, or sacks of empty hope if you are not. The door is a heavy thing, hung crooked on hinges that groan every time you open it. You bar it at night with a length of wood scavenged from the old fence. It gives you the illusion of security, but you know that if anything or anyone really wanted in, there would be little you could do. More than once, you have awoken to the sound of something scratching or rattling at the threshold. An animal, maybe, or something worse. You grip your rusted rifle and listen, heart pounding, until the silence returns. Windows are a luxury you do not possess. Instead, you stretch sheets of greased paper across the openings, letting in a weak yellowish light that does little to dispel the gloom. On good days, you can see shapes moving outside. On bad days, you see but only the blur of rain or snow beating against the paper. When the wind blows hard enough, it threatens to tear the covering free, and you scramble to patch it with whatever is at hand: old shirts, burlap sacks, scraps of leather. The floor is dirt, tamped hard over the years by countless footsteps. In the dry months, it sends up clouds of dust with every movement. In the wet months, it turns to sticky mud that clings to everything. You spread straw to soak up the worst of it, but the straw never lasts. Sometimes you wonder if it would be better to just live outside, to spare yourself the daily battle against the mud and dust. But you know that outside there is only the wind, the cold, and the things that hunt in the dark. Your furniture is whatever you can cobble together: rough planks for a table, crates for chairs, a bed frame that creaks so loudly you fear it will give you away to passing thieves or prowling wolves. You have few possessions, each one precious: a chipped plate, a battered kettle, a dull knife. Each item has its own story of acquisition, loss, or rescue from the brink of destruction. There is no real privacy. If you live with family, you learn to move quietly, to speak in low voices, to give each other space even when there is none to give. When sickness comes, and it always comes, you turn a corner of the room into a sick bed, hanging up a sheet as a curtain and hoping it will keep the illness contained. It never does. When storms blow in, you brace yourself against the walls, feeling the whole house shudder with each gust. You remember the stories of homes flattened by tornadoes, of roofs ripped clean off and carried for miles, of families buried in their own beds by a sudden wall of wind. Each storm is a reminder that your house is only pretending to be a fortress. Every creak and groan is a warning. Despite it all, you care for this place because you have to. You sweep the dirt floor, patch the leaks, stack your precious firewood, and hope the roof will last another season. The house is the only thing standing between you and oblivion. It is your anchor in a world that would rather see you drowned. You dream of a better home, a house with real windows, a roof that does not leak, walls that keep out the wind. But out here, dreams are a luxury. The house you have is the only one you will ever get. You tend it as you would a dying animal, with stubbornness, pity, and a small, hopeless kind of love. In the end, the house endures, or it does not. If it endures, so do you. If it fails, the land will reclaim what is left, and your story will be just another whisper in the wind, another lesson in how little a fortress is worth against the wild. Evening arrives slowly, as if it is reluctant to relieve you of the day's burdens. The light shifts from the color of old straw to a bruised, weary gray. Out here, sunset is not a golden hour, just a warning that you have only so much time left to finish what must be done before darkness settles in. On the rare occasion you pause to notice the sky, it is usually because the wind has changed or a sudden chill crawls up your spine. No one out here has ever written poetry about dusk. There is simply too much to do. The truth is, your day does not end when the sun disappears behind the hills. It only changes shape. The chores that were impossible under the heat and glare of noon now demand to be finished under the uncertain, dim light of a tallow candle, or more likely, by memory alone. You have performed the same tasks so many times that your body moves through them even as your mind wanders elsewhere, though not too far, for wandering minds are a luxury you cannot afford. The first of the evening chores is to bring in the animals. The chickens must be coaxed or chased, depending on their mood, back into the coop. Some nights, it is as easy as tossing a handful of corn and shutting the door behind the last straggler. More often, it is a comedy of errors. A hen vanishes into the tall grass. Another flies up onto the roof. A rooster eyes you with open contempt and makes a run for the gate the moment you turn your back. You mutter curses at birds who do not care, and you are not entirely sure whether you are angrier at the chickens or at yourself for still caring whether they live or die. The cows must be checked, fed, and milked again if you have not lost the habit entirely in the chaos of the day. There is nothing romantic about it. You stumble through mud and manure, the air thick with the day's heat, swatting away mosquitoes that seem to double in number every time you blink. The cows themselves move with an aggravating slowness, each one convinced the trough is not full enough or that the hay you offer is inferior to what they grazed on at dawn. You pull the heavy barn door clunged behind them, securing it with a loop of rope you pray will not break before morning. If you are lucky, the pigs and goats, should you have any, have not found a new hole in the fence. More likely, you are forced to trudge the fence line with a lantern, patching breaks with sticks, stones, or whatever you have on hand. The animals are cleverer than you, and every night is a test of your ability to anticipate their next escape. Some evenings you find evidence of predators, tufts of fur, scattered feathers, a strange silence. You shore up your defenses and know in your heart that you are only buying yourself another night of uneasy sleep. With the livestock secure, you turn your attention to the tools. Every item, hoe, rake, shovel, sickle, must be gathered and put away. If left outside, they will rust, warp, or simply vanish in the night, either swallowed by the mud or more likely borrowed by a neighbor who will swear they found it abandoned. You check the barn one last time, making mental notes about repairs that cannot be delayed any longer, all the while knowing you have neither the wood nor the nails to fix what needs fixing. You bring in water for the night, though you do not trust the well any more in the evening than you did in the morning. The bucket is heavier now, your arms tired, your hands raw. You avoid thinking about what might be swimming at the bottom, focusing instead on the fact that there is enough left for cooking, washing, and drinking until dawn. The house, small and always slightly colder than the outside air, waits for you like a disappointed parent. Inside, you light the lamp or the candle, watching as the weak flame flickers in the draft that slips through every gap and crack. You set about repairing what little you can. darning socks by candlelight with stiff fingers, patching a shirt with thread unraveled from the hem of something else, sharpening a dull knife on the edge of the hearthstone. The evening is not a time for rest. It is the only time led to mend the things the day has broken. If you have family, you share these tasks in silence. Voices are kept low. You do not want to attract the attention of passing strangers or whatever else may be moving outside in the dark. Children help as best they can, though their small hands tire quickly and their minds wander further than yours dares to go. Your spouse, if you have one, works with the same resigned determination, her eyes catching the light now and then, not with hope, but with a kind of stubborn refusal to give up. The meals of the evening are as meager as those of the morning, a thin stew stretched with whatever is left in the larder. Bread, if you are lucky, hard and stale, dipped in broth to soften it. You eat slowly, savoring every bite, not because it is delicious, but because you do not know when you will have more. The food is shared equally, though everyone pretends not to notice who is still hungry. Sometimes, if you are very fortunate, there are a few moments left for something almost like peace. Perhaps someone reads a page from a worn out book, the words nearly memorized after so many tellings. Maybe you listen to the wind, or to the crackle of the fire, or to the soft, rhythmic breathing of those around you as they drift into an exhausted sleep. It is in these moments, rare and fragile, that you almost remember what rest feels like. But there is always another chore. The fire must be banked for the night, the embers carefully covered to keep the heat alive until morning, the doors and windows checked and checked again, the meager stores of food counted, the sharpest knife set close at hand, just in case. You lay down, fully clothed, on a bed that is little more than a suggestion, and close your eyes, knowing that sleep, when it comes, will be shallow and full of worry. Evening does not bring rest. It only changes the shape of your labor. The darkness outside is thick and absolute, pressing against the walls, promising another hard, uncertain day when the sun returns. There is an old saying, repeated by the few who live long enough to grow cynical: on the frontier, you are never healthy, only not yet dying. You understand this truth better than you care to admit. Sickness is the constant shadow in your life, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a shout, but always there, waiting just beyond the threshold. You start to notice it in small ways first. A cough that will not go away, a headache that throbs behind your eyes, joints that ache even on warm days. You pretend you do not notice because there is always something else to do, and out here there are no sick days. Rest is not an option. Every hour lost to illness is another task left undone, another risk that the thin line between survival and disaster will snap. There is a kind of grim lottery in the ailments you endure. Malaria, they call it. Though out here it is just the shakes. It creeps up on you after the wet season, settling into your bones, making you shiver in the heat and sweat in the cold. There are fevers that come and go, bringing hallucinations of green fields or cool rivers that disappear the moment you open your eyes. Dysentery is another frequent visitor, a slow humiliating descent into weakness, robbing you of strength with every trip to the outhouse, if you are lucky enough to have one. Children are especially vulnerable. It starts with a sniffle or a slight cough. Soon, their cheeks burn with fever, their eyes glaze, and their small bodies curl into themselves, unable to keep food or water down. You do what you can: damp rags for the forehead, sips of boiled water, desperate prayers to saints you have not spoken to in years. Sometimes it passes, and you are left with a child thinner, quieter, changed in ways you cannot see. Sometimes it does not pass, and you dig a small, shallow grave in ground so hard it bends your shovel. Wounds are another risk, more common than you would like. A simple cut from a rusty nail, a scrape from a sharp rock, a blister that splits open during the endless field work. You try to clean them as best you can: boiling water, a rag soaked in whatever strong liquor you can spare, maybe a poultice made from wild herbs, if you remember which ones do not make things worse. Infection is always lurking, the redness creeping up a limb, the heat and swelling a sure sign that your efforts have failed. There are no doctors here, at least none who will come but all the way out to your farm. The best you can do is wait and hope and prepare for the worst. Winter brings its own set of torments. The cold settles into your lungs, turning every cough into a rattle, every breath into a gamble. Frostbite is a constant danger, especially for children who wander too far, or for adults forced to break ice from the water troughs with bare hands. Pneumonia is a word you learn to fear, a sudden, cruel sentence that can turn a strong man into a corpse in a week. You trade remedies and stories with your neighbors, each one more desperate than the last. Garlic boiled in water, onion poultices, whiskey rubbed on the chest, mustard plasters that burn the skin but do nothing for the fever inside. Sometimes you hear tales of a traveling doctor in town, but the distance is too great, the roads too muddy, the horse too sick. You make do, and sometimes you even fool yourself into believing the worst has passed. There is no real medicine, only superstition and improvisation. You tie red strings around wrists to ward off evil spirits, hang bunches of dried sage above the door, sprinkle salt in the corners to confuse whatever malice rides the wind. Some nights you wake from fever dreams certain that the land itself is cursed, that every breath brings you closer to the edge of some final, bottomless pit. The livestock suffer too, and their illnesses are your illnesses. When the cows cough, when the pigs stop eating, when the chickens stagger and drop dead for no reason you can see, you know it is only a matter of time before something similar strikes your own household. You bury the animals with the same silent dread, knowing you cannot afford to lose another mouth, nor another source of food. The worst part is the helplessness. You are a person who solves problems with your hands, who faces down storms and wild animals and hunger. Illness is something you cannot fight. You can only endure it, watching as it strips away strength, hope, and dignity, day after endless day. When you feel yourself weakening, when you see it in the faces of those around you, you try not to show fear. You tell yourself that others have survived worse, that your body is tougher than it feels, that tomorrow will be better. Sometimes you even believe it, but mostly you learn to live with sickness, to measure your days not in health or happiness, but in degrees of misery. There are good days when the pain is dull and the fever low, and there are bad days when you lie in bed counting the cracks in the ceiling, unable to do anything but wait for the world to stop spinning. You keep working, keep moving, because out here, there is no alternative. And so, illness becomes another part of life, a companion you cannot shake, a reminder that in the end, the West is not a place of freedom or fortune, but a slow battle against 1,000 invisible enemies, every one of them willing to wait you out. There is a joke out here, though no one laughs when they tell it. The only thing harder than the land is the man who comes to collect the taxes. You do not know whether to laugh or spit when you hear it. For all the stories of freedom, for all the salesmen and politicians promising that a person can be their own master on the western frontier, there is always someone waiting to remind you that your land, your sweat, your crop, and everything you pretend to own is in the end still not quite yours. The arrival of the tax man is never a surprise, but it is always a disappointment. He comes once a year, sometimes more often if there is talk of a new schoolhouse, a road that never gets built, or a courthouse you have never seen. He arrives in a cloud of dust, usually on the one good horse left in the county, wearing clothes that would be considered fine anywhere but out here, where they are just an insult. His face is as blank as his ledger. You know better than to ask for mercy, because he is not here for your story, only your dues. The man steps down, brushing imaginary dirt from his cuffs. He looks at your house, your barn, your shrinking stack of firewood. He asks about your harvest, though you both know the answer. He makes notes in his book, licking the tip of his pencil with exaggerated care. When he asks for payment, it is not really a question. It is a reminder, a yearly punctuation mark in a life without exclamation points. Money is a rarity. If you have coins, you have likely hidden them somewhere too clever for even yourself to find. More likely, you have none. The taxman is prepared for this. We take payment in kind, he says, voice flat, as if it is a kindness. You nod, knowing exactly what that means. A sack of wheat, a side of bacon, a chicken, a few pounds of potatoes, whatever you can spare, which is always too much. Each offering is weighed and recorded, though you have never seen the tally sheet add up in your favor. The loss is more than just food or seed. It is a little bit of your pride, gone with every forced offering. You know the taxman is not taking these things home to his own family. They will be for the community, distributed, resold, or lost in the shuffle. You never see the benefit. The roads remain rutted and impassable, the schoolhouse unfinished, the courthouse a rumor. Sometimes you hear talk of improvements, but out here, talk is as cheap as the whiskey they serve at the town's only saloon. You try not to resent the man himself. He is a tool, as battered by his task as you are by yours. Still, There is something galling about his easy way with your hard won goods, the practiced indifference in his voice. You wonder what it would be like to collect rather than give, to ride from place to place, so demanding a share of other people's work. But you know you would never survive the journey. Out here, every neighbor is armed, every dog is mean, every welcome is measured in suspicion. The taxman has nerves of iron, or else he has no nerves at all. Some years, the harvest is so poor that payment is impossible. Then you bargain, offering what you can: a promise, a promissory note, a favor owed. The taxman writes these things down, his pencil flying across the page, creating debts that will hang over you for years. You know these debts are traps, but what choice do you have? He does not care about the weather, the wolves, the locusts, or your child's cough. The government, distant, faceless, as indifferent as the weather, wants its share. You pay not only the taxman, but everyone else who claims a piece of your labor. There are dues for the church, dues for the road, dues for the water company that never manages to lay a pipe as far as your land. There are fees for registering your property, though no one else wants it, and for the privilege of grazing your animals on land so thin that even weeds grow reluctantly. There are fines for fence lines built too close to the neighbor's field, and fines for dogs that bark at the wrong time of night. Every year the list grows longer, the explanations vaguer, the punishments harsher. You do not complain, at least not loudly. You know what happens to those who refuse. You have seen what becomes of families that cannot pay. Their land is auctioned off, their belongings scattered, their names cursed or forgotten. The law, when it appears, does not take sides, it simply takes. Sometimes, in the evenings after the taxman leaves, you sit at your battered table running the numbers in your head. You count your debts, your losses, the price of every egg, every potato, every night spent worrying about how you will survive the next round. You wonder how many more years you can go on like this. How many more visits from men with ledgers and blank eyes you can endure before something inside you breaks. And yet, you keep going. You plant, you harvest, you pay. Not because you believe it will get better, but because there is nothing else to do. Out here, taxes and dues are as inevitable as the coming winter and just as merciless. The land takes, the sky takes, the animals take, and the taxman takes. What little remains, you guard fiercely, knowing it is all that stands between you and the empty, indifferent prairie. So when they ask you, in some distant future age, what life was like on the western frontier, you will not talk about freedom or opportunity. You will talk about the men who came, year after year, to remind you that even out here, at the edge of the known world, there is no such thing as your own land, your own life, or your own fate. There is only what you can hold on to and what you must give up. You may think that the worst of your problems on the frontier come from weather, hunger, or taxes, but you learn quickly that there is an even more persistent companion: fear. It sits with you at the breakfast table, follows you to the barn, waits for you in the darkness at the edge of your property. Fear is patient. It is not always the fear of one thing, but the constant, exhausting certainty that something will go wrong and that whatever goes wrong will be dangerous. You live under the shadow of violence. It is not the romantic, quick draw violence of the dime novels, where brave settlers chase away bandits and ride off into a golden sunset. No, this violence is slow, unpredictable, and mostly silent. Sometimes it is the threat of an animal, sometimes the threat of a man, sometimes something that comes in the night and leaves only muddy footprints and unanswered questions. There is, of course, the fear of wild animals, which are everywhere and always hungry. Wolves, lean and cunning, prowl the edges of your fields at dusk. You find their prints in the mud by the chicken coop, see their yellow eyes shining in the firelight if you stay out too late. They do not fear you, not really. They fear your rifle, perhaps, but they know it misfires more often than not, and they know you are not always awake. Sometimes you hear their howls in the night and count your animals in the morning, dreading what you will find. More than once, you have stumbled upon the mangled remains of a calf or a cluster of feathers and blood. When you hear your neighbors firing shots in the distance, you know they are fighting the same losing battle. Bears, too, are a threat, clumsy and huge, but clever in their own way. You have woken to find the barrel of stored grain smashed open, claw marks deep in the wood, the heavy lid tossed aside like a child's toy. You stand on your porch, rifle in hand, and hope you do not have to use it, because you know you will only have one chance. Bears do not frighten easily, and if you wound one and it decides to come for you, there is little your thin walls or tired bones can do. Coyotes come in packs, not just for your animals, but for anything edible, trash, scraps, even the seeds you set out for planting. You set traps, dig pits, string up lines of rattling cans and bones, but they learn quickly. There is a saying out here: you will die tired before you ever outsmart a coyote. The threat from other humans is less predictable but more terrifying. Sometimes it is just a traveler, lost or desperate, knocking at your door in the dead of night, asking for food or directions or shelter. You are never sure what they really want, and you cannot afford to be trusting. Hospitality is an old virtue, but out here it has sharp limits. You keep your shotgun close, your words short, your eyes on their hands. Then there are bandits, men with nothing left to lose, drifting from place to place looking for an easy mark. You hear rumors in town, stories traded in low voices over sour beer, a family robbed at gunpoint, a trader found dead in his wagon, his horses gone. You check your locks, though you know they are only as strong as the first determined kick. You practice loading your rifle in the dark, knowing full well that if the time comes, your hands may shake too much to aim. You do not speak of it often, but there is also the ever present fear of conflict with the native people whose land this once was. You hear stories, real and invented, about raids and revenge, about fires set in the night, about families vanishing without a trace. You wonder what is true and what is just a tale told to keep people afraid, but the fear is the same either way. You know that what you call your farm was once someone else's home. Sometimes you feel eyes watching you from the distant hills. Sometimes you wonder if you would do any different in their place. Sometimes the fear takes a quieter form, the sudden silence that falls at dusk, the feeling of being watched, the nervous glance over your shoulder when you leave the house after dark. The land itself feels hostile, the trees leaning in, the grass whispering warnings you cannot quite understand. You sleep lightly, waking at every sound, every creak of the floor, every gust of wind that rattles the windows. You learn to live with fear because you must. You do not talk about it openly. To admit fear is to invite more of it. Instead, you go through the rituals, checking doors, oiling the gun, stacking furniture against weak spots in the wall. You walk the perimeter at sunset, boots heavy in the soft earth, heart beating a little faster with every step. When you find tracks that are not your own, boot prints, paw prints, marks you cannot identify, you erase them quickly, as if pretending they never existed will keep danger at bay. Children grow up wary. You teach them to shout before they come around a corner, to avoid strangers, to hide at the sound of raised voices. You teach them to sleep with one eye open, to move quietly, to listen for the subtle sounds that mean trouble is coming. You want to protect them, but you know you cannot. Not really. On rare nights when the moon is bright and the wind is calm, you almost believe you are safe. You almost forget the threats that circle, waiting for a moment of weakness. But then a distant howl, a snap of a twig, a flicker of movement in the shadows reminds you of where you are and what you have to lose. In the morning, you check your animals, your supplies, your family. You make sure everyone is accounted for. You count your blessings, though the list is always short. Out here, fear is the price you pay for every sunrise. You never get used to it. You only learn to carry it, as surely as you carry your tools, your debts, and your doubts. The West does not care about your courage. It only cares how well you endure. It is a mistake, one made often and loudly by men in saloons and storybooks, to think the farm woman's life on the frontier is easier than the man's. Perhaps the work is different, but it is just as relentless, just as punishing, and just as thankless. In fact, it may be harder, since for her there is no illusion of mastery, only the certainty of endless need. If you live with a wife or a mother or a sister, you know this already. If you do not, the absence is a silence so total that it almost feels like a wound. The woman's day begins when yours does, and often ends much later. She wakes in the same chill darkness, roused by the same rooster, the same crying baby, the same call of animals who do not care about your plans or your fatigue. She swings her legs over the side of her straw mattress, feels the same cold, the same cracked mud floor, and rises into the half light with a sigh so soft it is lost in the rattle of the house. There is no time for idleness. The list of chores is endless, a loop that never closes. Her first job is to stoke the fire, coaxing reluctant flames from damp wood or from chips of dried manure when nothing else is left. The kitchen is the heart of the house, not because it is warm or inviting, but because it is always hungry, always demanding. She feeds it scraps, bones, anything that can burn, and in return it gives just enough heat to boil water, bake bread if there is flour, or cook the morning's thin porridge. She prepares the meal, serving everyone else first, eating last and least, scraping the pot for what remains. If there are children, she washes them as best she can, a rough rag dipped in cold water from the bucket, her fingers red and chapped. She checks their hair for lice, their skin for rashes, their teeth for rot. She watches for signs of fever, of infection, of hunger so sharp it turns the stomach sour. If one falls ill, she is the nurse and the doctor, mixing poultices, boiling herbs, sitting by the bedside all night, counting breaths and prayers. Laundry is a constant battle. Clothes, so hard won and precious, are battered by wind, rain, and the rough hands of every day. She hauls water from the well, builds a fire outside, fills a battered pot with rags and lye and soap if there is any left. She scrubs each piece against a washboard, knuckles raw, back aching, wrists swollen. She wrings them out and hangs them on the line, hoping the wind will dry them before the next storm blows in. Some weeks, her hands are so cracked and swollen that she can barely close her fists. She keeps the house as clean as she can. It is a losing battle. Dust seeps through the walls, mud tracks in from the yard, animals wander in and out, mice nest in the corners, and spiders drop from the ceiling. She sweeps the dirt floor, patches the roof, fills the gaps with straw and rags, always chasing comfort that never quite arrives. When the field work is too much for one, she goes out to help, planting, weeding, harvesting, hauling water, stacking wood. She tends the chickens, gathers eggs, milks the cows, slaughters the animals when the time comes. Her apron is stained with blood and earth, her sleeves torn and mended again and again. She is never still, never idle, moving from one task to the next until the day is done or her body gives out. If there is a moment of peace, rare, flickering, she mends what can be mended. She patches trousers, knits socks, rebuttons shirts. She reads a page from a Bible or a letter from a distant relative. Sometimes she sings to herself, a tune half remembered from another life, drowned out by the wind and the cries of her youngest child. And always there is worry, worry for the crops, for the animals, for the children, worry for you. If you are late returning from the fields, if the weather turns, if a stranger passes by, her heart thunders in her chest. She hides her fears, but you see them sometimes in the hard set of her jaw, in the way she stands at the door after sunset, scanning the horizon for your shape. The work she does is invisible, except when it goes undone. A broken latch, an empty cupboard, a child shivering in dirty clothes. These are the things people notice. They do not notice the hundreds of things she fixes each day, the little wounds she bandages, the food she stretches, the warmth she conjures from nothing. They do not see her tears, shed late at night when everyone else is asleep, wiped away before dawn comes again. If the family is large, there is no end to her labor. If someone dies, child, parent, even you, she buries them, marks the grave, and keeps going. If a new baby arrives, she delivers it herself or with the help of another woman, hands trembling, heart pounding, hoping for the best. She is there for every beginning, every ending, every hard and weary day in between. No one writes stories about her. There are no statues, no songs. If she is mentioned, it is in passing, as someone's wife, someone's mother. But you know, if you are honest with yourself, that without her, the house would crumble, the children would starve, the crops would fail, and you would not last a month. You know this, and yet you do not say it, not out loud. You see it in her hands, broad, strong, always moving, always carrying, always repairing. You see it in her face, where laughter lines have been replaced by worry lines, where her eyes are sharp and tired and impossibly kind. You see it in the way she never gives up, not because she believes things will get better, but because she cannot afford to stop. And so, when you look back on these years, you will remember her not as a shadow at the edge of your story, but as the quiet force that kept everything from falling apart. You will remember her strength, her patience, her refusal to be broken. Out here, on the wild edge of nowhere, she is not a supporting character. She is the one holding the world together, one splintered day at a time. Children on the frontier are not children in the sense understood by poets and painters. No one here waxes sentimental about innocence or carefree days. Childhood is not a golden time. It is simply the earliest rung on the long, hard ladder of survival. If a child can walk, a child can work. If a child can talk, a child can listen to instructions, warnings, or the complaints of adults already ground down by life. Out here, children are not a hope for the future. They are extra hands, a living insurance policy against disaster. From their first memories, children learn that the world is a place of constant labor. Their toys are rocks and sticks. Their playground is the same patch of dirt they will spend the rest of their lives digging, planting, or hauling across. By the time they are able to form a full sentence, they know how to gather eggs, shoo away chickens, and fill the water bucket from the well, though it sloshes more than it pours. Every morning, you wake them before sunrise. You do not ask if they are tired. You do not ask if they are hungry. These things are assumed as universal as the mud on their boots or the sunburn on their necks. You hand them chores like you hand out bread. Take this, do that, finish before you eat. Some help in the kitchen, others in the yard. The bigger ones are trusted with sharp tools and heavy loads before they have lost all their baby teeth. The smaller ones trail after their siblings, learning by watching, their heads full of rules and dangers. School is a distant dream for most. If there is a schoolhouse at all, it stands miles away, and the walk there is an education in itself. Across fields, through freezing rain, chased by dogs or startled by snakes. Some years there is a teacher, usually someone who failed at farming or never managed to escape. The lessons are brief and basic, interrupted by the demands of planting and harvest, by the sicknesses that sweep through every home, by the simple reality that hands are worth more in the fields than at a desk. If a child learns to read, it is with a Bible or a battered almanac. Arithmetic is taught with potatoes, beans, and the counting of livestock. Spelling is a luxury, and writing is something you do only when you have news worth sending: a birth, a death, a plea for help. Children learn quickly that mistakes are costly. Leave the barn door open, and a night's work is lost to the wolves. Spill a bucket of water, and you walk to the well again, even if it is midnight and the stars are ice on your skin. Forget to watch the youngest, and they might wander into the creek, the road, or the arms of sickness. Punishment is usually swift and simple: a sharp word, a slap, extra chores. There is no time for drawn out lectures or empty threats. The work is endless. Boys and girls alike weed the garden, haul firewood, herd animals, and mend fences. They gather wild berries when the larder runs low, hunt rabbits or birds with slingshots made from scraps, collect cow chips for fuel. On laundry day, they help haul water and scrub clothes until their fingers wrinkle. When an animal falls ill or a new calf is born, they stand beside you, learning how to coax life from misery, or, when that fails, how to bury the dead with quiet efficiency. You try not to let them see how tired you are. You save your softer words for moments when the world is not looking: a rough hug after a day of hard work, a whispered story before sleep, a piece of bread saved from your own plate. But the children see more than you think. They see the lines deepening on your face, the way your hands tremble when you count out the last of the beans, the way you stare out at the field as if hoping for a miracle. They do not complain, not much. Complaints are wasted energy, and the world offers little sympathy. Children are tough, and they have to be. Their feet are hard and calloused, their hands raw from rope and shovel. Their eyes are older than their years, wary of strangers, alert to danger, quick to read a change in the weather or a shift in your tone. They know when to hide, when to run, when to lie. You teach them these things not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. To be soft here is to be lost. Illness is the great equalizer. Children fall sick as easily as adults, sometimes more so. A fever burns through the house, and you do what you can: rags, herbs, prayers. Sometimes they recover, thinner and quieter, their playfulness replaced by caution. Sometimes they do not recover. There are graves behind every house, small markers for lives measured in seasons rather than years. You do not speak of it, but you remember every name. Sometimes, in the rare moments when there is no urgent work and the weather is gentle, you see flashes of what childhood might have been: a game of tag around the woodpile, laughter as someone falls into the creek, a race to climb the tallest tree. These moments are as fleeting as rain in a drought, gone before you can draw breath. You cherish them, even as you know they are borrowed time. You hope, secretly, that your children will have a different life. Maybe, if the crops are good, if the animals live, if the world does not swallow them whole, they will leave this place for something softer. Maybe they will remember you kindly, not just as the hand that set them to work, but as the person who kept them alive when everything else wanted them gone. But you do not say these things aloud. Out here, hope is as fragile as a robin's egg, and you cannot afford to let it break. In the end, children on the frontier are not spared, not protected, not sheltered from the world. They are its smallest, fiercest survivors. Their laughter is rare, their rest is brief, and their value is measured not in years, but in what their hands can hold, what their backs can carry, and what their hearts can endure. You get used to solitude on the frontier. You start to crave it, even if you did not come here for peace or privacy, but simply because you had nowhere else to go. You learn the rhythm of your own footsteps, the sound of the wind against the house, the voices of your family and your animals, each as familiar as your own heartbeat. And this every so often, never when you expect it, never when you are ready, the silence is broken by the arrival of someone else. Out here, there is no such thing as a casual visitor. Every arrival at your door carries the weight of possibility and danger in equal measure. Maybe it is a neighbor, maybe a stranger, maybe someone who has wandered too far or has nowhere else to go. Whatever the reason, the effect is the same. Your world, precarious and painfully balanced, is thrown into uncertainty. You spot the guest first as a distant shape on the horizon, moving steadily, too steadily to be a coyote or a lost cow. Sometimes it is a lone rider, a hat pulled low and a coat pulled tight. Sometimes it is a figure on foot, their steps uneven, their shadows stretching behind them in the failing light. You watch from the doorway, your heart rising into your throat, your hands moving without thinking to whatever passes for a weapon. You do not call out. Out here, shouting is a risk. The guest comes closer. If you have a dog, it barks and circles, uncertain whether to attack or retreat. Your children, if you have them, cluster near the wall, wide eyed and silent. The house suddenly feels even smaller than usual. You do not know whether to bolt the door or leave it ajar as a sign that you are not afraid. Fear on the frontier is like blood in the water. When the guest finally arrives, there is always a moment of careful appraisal. They look at you, measuring your strength, your caution, your willingness to help or to harm. You do the same. Words come slowly, if at all. Sometimes the guest is a neighbor, face drawn with worry, hat in hand, asking for a tool, a handful of seed, a place to rest. Sometimes it is a stranger, lost or pretending to be lost, hungry, eyes darting over your meager possessions, as if calculating what could be stolen in the night. Hospitality is a duty, one of the last things you cling to, a thread of decency in a world intent on tearing it apart. You offer water, bread if you have it, a place by the fire. You do not let your guard down. You do not show the best of what you have. You watch the guests' hands, the way they sit, the way their eyes move in the dim light. You remember every story you have heard: the traveler who stole a horse, the lost soldier who turned out to be a thief, the peddler who disappeared in the night, leaving only footprints and suspicion behind. There are good guests sometimes: a trader with news from town, a peddler with a needle or a comb to barter, a neighbor's son bringing a letter or a message. These visits, rare as rain in July, are a glimpse of the world beyond your farm, a reminder that for all its cruelty, the world still exists outside your patch of earth. News comes in fragments: the price of flour, a new law, rumors of gold, stories of floods and fires and fortunes lost or found. You listen closely, knowing that information can be as valuable as bread or bullets. But more often, the guest is a burden. They arrive at the worst time: when you are low on food, when someone in the house is sick, when the weather is turning or the barn is half collapsed. They ask for what you do not have, and you give what you cannot spare because the cost of refusal is too high. Word travels faster than you think, and a reputation for stinginess can be more dangerous than hunger itself. Sometimes the guest is a threat: a face you do not recognize, eyes that linger too long on your children or your meager supplies. You tell yourself you are imagining things, but you do not sleep that night. The guest takes the bed, and you sit by the door, rifle across your knees, watching shadows shift in the corners. In the morning, they are gone, leaving nothing behind but muddy footprints and a colder house. There are guests you cannot refuse: the sheriff with his badge and his questions, the traveling preacher with his pamphlets and his tired smile, the tax collector whose visits are as regular as the changing seasons. These guests take without asking, confident in the authority they carry. You smile and nod, cursing under your breath, calculating what you can spare without starving before the next harvest. Every guest leaves a mark. After they are gone, you check your supplies, your tools, your animals. You count the eggs, the coins, the knives, and try to remember if you ever had more. You walk the perimeter, scanning for tracks, broken branches, things out of place. You tell your children not to speak of the visitor, not to repeat what was said or done, not to trust too easily. Out here, memories are short, but suspicions are long. There are times, in the long stretch of winter or the dry silence of summer, when you almost wish for a guest, someone to break the monotony, to remind you that you are not the last soul alive on this endless prairie. But when the knock finally comes, or the shadow appears on the road, you remember why you prefer the quiet, the certainty, the routine of your own hard life. Guests bring change, and out here, change is never kind. After the guest leaves, the house feels different, as if the walls themselves are waiting for the next arrival. You return to your chores, your worries, your quiet. The door creaks a little more, the dog barks a little less, and you settle back into the uneasy rhythm of survival, hoping the next guest waits a long, long time before finding your door. Catastrophe on the frontier does not announce itself with a trumpet or a warning. It arrives quietly, sometimes as a sigh, sometimes as a crack, sometimes as a faint scent of smoke on the wind. You learn to recognize the smallest shifts, the softest sounds, because you know that disaster can come at any time, and that when it does, it will come for you first. It starts with the little things. A roof shingle gone missing after a storm, letting in a slow, steady drip that ruins your only dry bed. A loosened board on the barn, flapping in the wind, the sound growing louder each night until, finally, the whole wall gives way and the livestock scatter into the darkness. A forgotten lantern left burning just a little too close to the curtains, a single spark landing on the floor while you are busy with some other crisis. The line between inconvenience and catastrophe is thin, so thin, sometimes you do not notice you have crossed it until it is too late. Fire is the first enemy. The land is hungry for flame. In the dry months, everything crackles underfoot. The grass is brittle, the wood is parched, and every breeze feels like it carries a threat. You wake to the smell of smoke, your heart beating out of your chest. You grab the bucket, the blanket, the first thing you can find, and run outside to see which way the wind is blowing. If you are lucky, it is just the neighbor burning off his field, or some careless spark from the stove caught in a patch of weeds. If you are not, it is your house, your barn, your only pile of hay. You shout, you throw water, you beat at the flames with wet sacks, hands burning, lungs raw. By the time it is done, what is left is black and smoldering. You count the losses by what you cannot find: the roof beam, the food stores, the animal that does not answer when you call. Floods are less frequent, but just as merciless. The rain, when it comes all at once, pounding the earth flat, turning the road to a river and the fields to lakes. Water seeps in under the door, pours through the cracks in the walls, pools beneath your bed, soaks the last of your firewood. You stack things high, move what you can, but the water rises faster than you do. Sometimes the foundation gives way and the house lifts to one side, a slow, sickening tilt that promises worse to come. When the rain finally stops, you shovel out mud and debris, counting every ruined sack, every drowned chick, every memory washed away. The wind is its own kind of catastrophe, invisible but no less real. It comes in the night, rattling the house, tearing at the shingles, pulling loose everything that is not nailed down, and most things that are. You lie awake, listening to the howl, waiting for the crash that means something vital has been torn away. In the morning, you find shingles scattered in the yard, fence posts leaning at odd angles, the barn door twisted and hanging by a single hinge. You do what you can to patch it all back together, knowing the next storm is never far away. Sometimes disaster is quieter, crueler. The well goes dry, and there is no water for the animals, the garden, or your own aching throat. The cow you depend on for milk dies in the night, bloated and stiff, its eyes staring up at the sky as if seeking an explanation. The horse comes up lame just when the plowing cannot be delayed another day. The plow breaks, the last good blade snaps, the harness frays and gives way, dumping the whole day's work into the mud. You curse, you fix what you can, you improvise, you limp through the day and hope tomorrow brings something better. There are pests and vermin too, rats in the grain bin, weevils in the flour, lice in the bed, fleas on the dog, worms in the apples, and beetles in the beans. You set traps, you boil water, you sprinkle ashes, and hope for the best, but the invasion never really stops. Sometimes it feels as if the house itself is being eaten away from the inside, chewed to splinters by 1,000 tiny mouths. And then, every so often, there is the big one. A tree comes crashing down in a storm, splitting the roof, smashing the table where you ate your last good meal. Or the barn collapses under the weight of a late snow, burying animals, tools, and hopes in one heavy, silent heap. Or the family dog, the one creature who greeted you with joy, is bitten by a rattlesnake or run over by a wagon. There is a funeral of sorts. You dig a hole, you say a few words, you move on. The world does not stop for grief out here. You come to accept that disaster is not a question of if, but of when. Each day you make small bargains, patching one thing while another falls apart, choosing which crisis can be put off and which must be faced head on. You save and hoard and plan, always preparing for the next time fate decides to pay a visit. Sometimes your preparation pays off. A hidden stash of nails, a half rotted board pressed into service one more season, a memory of how your father fixed a broken axle with nothing but rope and a prayer. More often, you are left with nothing but exhaustion and a growing sense that the land will always win in the end. And yet, you endure, you clean up, you rebuild, you bury the dead and salvage the living. You start again, knowing it is only a matter of time before the next catastrophe finds you. Some nights, when the house creaks and groans under the weight of wind and time, you wonder why you bother. But there is no choice. Catastrophe is as much a part of this life as the dirt, the wind, and the endless grinding labor. You do not defeat it, you only survive it, one day at a time. When you read about the West in the handbills and newspapers, written, no doubt, by someone who has never spent a night with wind howling through a wall of knotholes, the tales are full of feasts, dances, and the kind of hearty laughter that shakes the rafters. But for you and everyone else out here, joy is not a banquet or a celebration. Joy is a fleeting thing, thin as the broth you eat for supper, fragile as the light from your one remaining candle. It sneaks in, almost by accident, and never stays long enough to make itself comfortable. Most days, you do not look for happiness. You look for something less, a moment's peace, a sliver of relief, a joke that is not too cruel. And when those moments do come, they arrive not as rewards for virtue or hard work, but as tiny, unexpected windfalls. The rare, meager joys of your existence are not what anyone would call happiness, but out here, you learn not to be picky. There is the joy of the harvest, if you are lucky enough to have one. It comes late after months of worry, backbreaking work, and whispered curses at the sky. You pull potatoes from the earth, brush the dirt from a handful of beans, watch the corn stand taller than your youngest child. You know it will not last. That much of what you bring in will be eaten by rats, lost to rot, or demanded by the taxman. But for a brief moment, you let yourself feel pride. The sacks are heavy, your arms ache, but your table will not be empty. Not yet. Sometimes there is a market or a fair in town, a rare excuse to gather, to see faces you have not seen in months, to remember that you are not the last stubborn fool left on the prairie. The market is not much. A row of wagons, a few booths set up with dented kettles, threadbare shirts, jars of last year's preserves. There are no orchestras, just a fiddler who plays with more enthusiasm than skill, his music almost drowned out by the wind. Still, you find yourself tapping your foot, nodding to neighbors you only half trust, laughing at the smallest joke, because there is nothing left to lose by laughing. On these days, someone might bring news from back east, a letter, a scrap of a newspaper, a rumor about the price of wheat or the end of the world. Sometimes the news is good. A distant cousin married, a baby born, a new store opened in a town you will never see. More often, the news is bad. Another family has moved away. Another farm has burned. Another child is buried in a nameless grave. But for a few hours, you are part of something larger, if only a community of survivors. You count yourself lucky if you have music. Maybe you keep an old harmonica, a fiddle with one string missing, or a battered banjo that goes out of tune the moment the weather changes. When the day's work is done and the fire is just embers, someone picks up the instrument and plays. The tune is always the same, a melancholy waltz or a crooked reel, but it fills the silence. You might sing, your voice rough with dust and fatigue, or just listen, closing your eyes and letting the music carry you somewhere softer, even if only for a moment. Food, when it is not a burden, can be a joy. The first egg found after a long, hungry winter. A loaf of bread that rises just right. A pie, rare as rain, made from wild berries you risked poison and thorns to collect. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, letting the sweetness cut through the constant taste of ash and iron. You remember every good meal, hoarding the memory for the next lean season. Children, if you have them, are both a sorrow and a joy. They laugh at things you do not understand, a grasshopper leaping, a tumble in the dust, a story told in the dark with hands making shadows on the wall. Their laughter is bright and sharp, quick to vanish, but impossible to forget. You find yourself smiling, even as you worry how you will keep them alive another year. Sometimes joy comes from simple survival. A calf born healthy after a night of storms. A roof that holds through the winter. A night when no one is sick, no one is missing, no one is afraid. You count these blessings not with gratitude, but with a wary relief, knowing that they are borrowed, never owned. There is pleasure, too, in small victories over the land itself. A fence mended before the next windstorm. A field cleared of rocks, even if the next rain will bring more. a tool fixed with wire and luck, lasting another month. You find yourself boasting about these things to your neighbors, who boast back in turn, each story taller than the last, each claim met with laughter that borders on tears. If you have family, you take comfort in their nearness, though comfort is not the same as ease. The warmth of another body in a cold bed, a hand squeezed in the dark, a wordless agreement that for all its cruelty, the world is easier to bear together. If you are alone, joy is the absence of loneliness, a letter in the post, a bird at the window, a dream that lingers just long enough to soften the morning. You do not trust joy. You have learned that the land will snatch it away as quickly as it is given, that every good moment is followed by two bad ones. Still, you hold on to it, tight as a secret, refusing to let the world take even this small mercy. You share it sparingly, protecting it from the hard hands of neighbors, the cold eye of fate. In the end, your joys are meager, but they are yours. They do not make you forget the hunger, the loss, the endless labor, but they do make it possible, sometimes, to endure. You would not call yourself happy. That word is too large for your world. But sometimes, when the wind is gentle and the sky is kind and you have enough to eat, you almost remember what happiness was supposed to feel like. And out here, almost is enough. There are places in the world where people claim to love winter, where snow means sleigh rides and laughter, where a fire is for coziness, not survival, and where the cold is just an excuse to drink something hot and sweet. The people who say these things have never seen a Western winter. Out here, winter is not a season, it is a siege. It is a test of how much misery a body can take before it breaks, and a tally of every mistake you have made since the last thaw. Winter does not arrive quietly. One day, the wind changes and the sky turns the color of dirty tin. The temperature drops so fast it steals your breath, and you feel the first warning aches in your knuckles and knees. You scramble to prepare, but you are never ready. The firewood pile that seemed generous in September shrinks to a pathetic stack in November, the logs wet and stubborn from autumn rain. You bring it inside, one armload at a time, trailing mud and slush across the floor, hoping it will dry fast enough to burn. It never does. You double up the rags in the cracks of the walls. You pile every blanket, coat, and patched shirt onto the beds. Still, the cold finds a way in. At night, you lie awake, listening to the wind tear at the roof, imagining it peeling away the shingles, lifting the whole house into the sky. When the fire burns down, you fight for the privilege of getting up to feed it, your bare feet hitting the icy floor like hammers. You tell yourself that moving will warm you, but it never does. Sometimes you try to recall what warmth even feels like. The water freezes solid in the well, the bucket stuck to the ice. You chip away at it with an axe, hands shaking, breath fogging the air. The animals are desperate too, their water troughs rimmed with ice so thick it takes half the morning to break through. You pray the cow will last the winter, that the chickens will not freeze to the perch, that the horse will not give up and lie down in the snow. More than once, you bury something in the frozen ground, the grave shallow and hurried, because the earth will not yield. Food becomes a daily question. The root cellar, which seemed full in autumn, empties far too quickly. The potatoes shrivel, the apples rot, the beans go soft with mold. Every meal is a calculation. How much can you spare today without starving tomorrow? You stretch flour with sawdust, stew bones until there is nothing left but bitterness. Scrape the last traces of fat from the bottom of a jar. You dream of meat, but most of your livestock are too valuable to slaughter. Hunger is a constant, nagging companion, making every argument sharper and every night longer. You spend much of winter indoors, trapped in the small, dark house with people as irritable and restless as yourself. The air inside grows stale, thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and unwashed bodies. Tempers fray. Children squabble over the smallest things: a piece of bread, a spot closest to the fire, a story half remembered from better times. Adults speak less and less, saving words for necessity. Sometimes the silence is so heavy you can hear the snow piling up against the walls. Sickness loves the winter. Coughs echo through the house, turning into something deeper and more dangerous. Fevers break out with nowhere to go. If someone falls truly ill, there is little you can do. There is no doctor, no medicine, just hot water and prayers, and sometimes not even that. You watch as strength seeps out of the sick, their cheeks hollowing, their eyes growing bright with fever or dull with resignation. You try to ignore the growing mound of dirty rags, the sound of shallow breathing at night, the way a person's cough can suddenly go quiet. The days are short and gray, the nights are endless. You count time by the supply of wood, by the number of meals left, by the tracks you see in the snow, animal or human. You cannot always tell. The world outside becomes another country, one you can visit only at risk. Every trip to the barn is a journey through a white, bitter wilderness. The snow so deep it pulls at your boots, the wind so sharp it feels like a punishment for daring to leave the house. There are moments when the sky clears and the moon throws hard blue shadows across the snow. The silence is absolute, broken only by the groan of the trees and the distant howl of something hungry. You stand at the window, wrapped in every piece of clothing you own, watching for any sign of movement. You are not sure whether you are more afraid of what you might see or of what you might miss. Sometimes the cold brings strange hallucinations: a memory of summer, a whiff of grass, a taste of something sweet and forgotten. You might catch yourself laughing at nothing or weeping for no reason at all. Winter does not just attack the body, it chips away at the mind. You find yourself making bargains with the darkness, promising anything if only the sun will return, if only the roof will hold, if only you can last another day. Yet, for all its misery, winter is also a kind of teacher. It shows you what matters: warmth, food, company. It reminds you of your limits and your stubbornness and just how much suffering a person can take and still rise for another morning. It makes the smallest comforts, A cup of hot water, a patch of sunlight, a joke shared in the dark feel like miracles. When spring finally comes, it does not come with fanfare. The snow melts, leaving behind a world of mud and broken things. You emerge, blinking in the weak sunlight, taking stock of what is left and what is gone. You do not celebrate, you just get back to work, grateful only that you are still here, still stubborn, still counting the days. Out here, winter is not survived. It is endured, one shivering, hungry, sleepless night at a time. If you have been on the frontier long enough, you notice the change in your dreams. Not just the kind that come at night, but the bigger ones, the ones you brought with you in the first place, when you packed your wagon, or staked your claim, or followed a trail you could not even pronounce. The West was supposed to be a place for dreamers, for those who wanted more. That is what they said, anyway. The advertisements showed clean houses, golden wheat, happy children, and fortunes waiting to be claimed by the first bold enough to reach out. You do remember your dreams. Maybe you wanted land of your own, a piece of earth no one could take away, where you could build a house and a life and a future that would outlast you. Maybe you imagined becoming a person of consequence, someone who mattered, whose voice was heard in the town meetings, whose name was written in the county ledger and passed down to children and grandchildren. Or perhaps your dream was simpler, to be free of debts and landlords, to eat well, to sleep easy, to live without someone always standing over you, taking a share of what you grew with your own hands. The land, though, has its own plans. The first year, you still believe. You plant and tend and repair and patch. You count your rows of corn, your jars of beans, your weeks until harvest. When things go wrong, when hail flattens the field, or a late frost takes the seedlings, or some disease turns your potato patch to mush, you tell yourself it is just bad luck, that next year will be better. Hope is cheap the first year. The second year, you start to notice the cracks. The dreams grow smaller. You stop talking about the big house you will build someday, the orchard you will plant, the herd you will raise until you are rich. You start talking instead about getting the roof patched before the next storm, or finding enough seed to replant what was lost, or keeping the cow alive through winter. You bargain with yourself, with the land, with whatever gods or ghosts you think might still be listening. By the third year, the dreams become superstitions, things you do not dare say out loud, for fear the wind or the soil or the endless sky will hear you and take offense. You tell yourself it is enough to survive. If there are children, you dream for them, not for yourself. You dream that they might leave, might find a place where the ground is softer, where the winters are not so long, where the work is just work and not a daily fight for existence. There is no shortage of reminders of broken dreams. You see them every day. The abandoned cabins scattered across the prairie, their roofs caved in, windows gaping like empty eyes. The fence posts left half driven, the plow rusting in the field, the graves marked only by a stone or a scrap of wood. You know some of the stories, families who left in the night, leaving debts and memories behind, men who wandered into town one last time and never came back, women who faded away, one silent day after another. In the long evenings, you sometimes catch yourself remembering the old dreams. Maybe you laugh, maybe you feel a sting behind your eyes, and you tell yourself it is just the smoke from the fire. You remember the letters you wrote to family back east, full of promises and plans, and the letters you stopped writing when you ran out of things to say that were not complaints or confessions. You remember neighbors who arrived with you, eyes full of hope, and left with little more than they brought. You learn not to trust the future. When someone asks about your plans, you shrug, change the subject, look out at the sky as if searching for rain. You know that the next bad storm or sick animal or tax collector or neighbor's fire or winter too harsh for human beings will take whatever hope you let yourself feel. You do not dare wish for luck. You do not pray for miracles. You know what comes of hope out here. Still, there is a part of you, a stubborn, unreasonable part, that keeps going, not because you believe the dream will come true, but because you do not know how to stop chasing it. You keep planting, keep patching, keep scraping by, because the alternative is to give up and let the prairie win. Maybe that is the real frontier spirit. Not courage, not faith, not optimism, but simple refusal to give up even when every sign tells you it is pointless. You watch your children or your neighbor's children, and you hope they will have more than you did. Not riches, perhaps, but less hunger, less fear, less disappointment. You teach them to be careful with their dreams, to aim small, to be grateful for little things. You know they do not listen. That is the way of youth. You almost envy them. At night, sometimes, you do still dream. The land is green, the house is warm, the table is full. You wake up to the same cold wind, the same creaking roof, the same empty pantry, and you remind yourself that dreams out here are like rainbows, beautiful from a distance, but always out of reach, fading as you approach. The West is full of broken dreams. They drift across the fields with the tumbleweeds, get buried under every new house, echo in the silence between storms. You live with them, and if you are wise, you learn not to hate them, but to let them keep you company on the long, lonely days between planting and harvest, between winter and spring. Because in the end, it is not the dream that matters, but the stubbornness to keep going, even when you know, especially when you know, it will never come true. You might think, after all this, that there would come a day when the cycle breaks, a morning when you wake rested, when the sun glows gentle and warm, when the aches and hunger and worry have faded, if only a little. You might imagine that a life of hard labor and harder luck has earned you a reprieve. You would be wrong. Out here, every new day is just yesterday's ghost, dressed up in a different disguise. The calendar changes, the seasons turn, but the story is the same: work, hunger, fear, loss, and the rare, meager taste of something almost like peace. The day begins as it always has. The rooster shrieks, a sound so shrill and ancient you wonder if even the land itself is tired of it. The house is cold, the light is thin, and you climb out of bed stiff and aching. You notice the draft before your feet touch the floor, the stale smell of smoke and bodies in the small room. Every movement feels rehearsed because it is. You put on the same patched shirt, the same stiff boots, the same battered hat. You check the bucket for water, find it lower than you hoped, and remember the endless trek to the well ahead of you. The routine is relentless. Tend the fire, fetch the water, wake the children if you have them, with a nudge or a gentle word if you can manage it. Breakfast is a negotiation with scarcity. If there is flour, you make a thin porridge, pretending not to notice how little is left in the sack. If there is milk, it is probably sour. You eat slowly, swallowing your complaints, forcing yourself to act as if this is enough. If there are guests, expected or not, you stretch the meal even thinner. Outside, the chores wait. The animals are impatient, their needs as urgent and indifferent as ever. You trudge through mud or snow, depending on the month, checking for survivors, because that is what your livestock have become, not stock or wealth, but fellow survivors. You count the cows, the chickens, the missing. You patch the fence, curse the weather, check for wolf prints or signs that another neighbor's dog has paid a visit in the night. Each task has been done so many times you could do it blind. Sometimes you do. The day is eaten by work. You plant or harvest, mend or build, haul or fix. Each job is another small battle against a world determined to grind you down. Your back aches, your hands crack and bleed, your eyes sting from wind and sun and dust. You tell yourself it could be worse. Sometimes it is. You see your neighbors rarely, and when you do, you nod, never asking if things are better because you both know the answer. You share tools, advice, warnings about weather or bandits or wild dogs. You help each other not out of kindness, but out of necessity, a quiet pact to endure together what none could survive alone. As the sun sinks, the chores do not end, they just move indoors. There is wood to stack, clothes to mend, food to stretch for one more meal. You patch leaks, bank the fire, check every door and window. You listen for the sound of trouble in the dark, the snap of a branch, the shuffle of something living just beyond the lamplight. Your children, if you have them, settle on the floor or the bed, exhausted but restless. If you are alone, you fill the silence with the scraping of a knife on wood or the low hum of an old song. Night does not bring peace, only another kind of vigilance. Sleep comes in shallow fits, broken by every wind and every worry. You dream, if you dream at all, of chores left undone or storms not yet weathered. You wake before dawn, unsure if you have slept at all, and listen to the world waiting for you. The same world, the same unbroken circle. You know that nothing will change. Not really. The seasons will spin past in a blur of toil and hunger, cold and heat, birth and loss. Every improvement is temporary. Every disaster leaves a mark. You watch as hope shrinks into survival and dreams wither into the smallest practicalities. Still, you rise each morning. You keep going, not because you expect a reward, but because the alternative is unthinkable. If you are lucky, there are brief moments when the routine breaks, a visit from a neighbor, the birth of a calf, a good meal, laughter around a dying fire. These are not the stuff of stories, not the moments anyone will write ballads about, but they are yours. You hold on to them even as the wheel turns and brings you back to the beginning. You tell yourself you will change something, work a little harder, save a little more, dream a little less. You promise your children or yourself that next year will be better, though you know in your bones it will be much the same. You keep a list of small victories and smaller losses, tallying them like a gambler with no luck and no choice but to keep playing. Out here, on the edge of the world, there is no grand ending, no revelation or reward for all your suffering. There is only the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, each one exactly like the last, and every one a small, stubborn act of defiance against a world that would just as soon forget you exist. And so the sun rises, and you get up again and again and again in a circle as old and unbreakable as the prairie itself.